What is the difference between mastodons and mammoths? Elephants and elephant-like animals are truly wonderful and fascinating creatures. From their sheer size, crazy intelligence, and complex social dynamics, these animals are and were truly special. Today we're looking at two of the most iconic prehistoric elephant cousins, mastodons and mammoths. What's the story behind these two? Were they one and the same, or were they totally different animals? Let's talk about it. Mastodons. Mastodons are an extinct group of elephant-like mammals that lived during the late Miocene all through to the early Holocene. However, unlike modern elephants, mastodons are not part of the Elephantidae family. Instead, they belong to Mammothidea, a family of fascinating elephantomorphs that are now, sadly, long extinct. Within Mammothidea is the genus Mammoth, the mastodons. So far, scientists have confirmed 8 mastodon species, with a further 4 being debated. What's interesting about the word mammoth is that the word is actually German for mammoth. But in modern taxonomy, at least, mammoths are not classified within the genus or even the Mammothidea family. The word mastodon itself is an amalgamation of the ancient Greek words mastos, which means breast, and otis, which means tooth. While mastodons may not be true mammoths, they were truly mammoth-sized. Naturally, true size and weight figures are murky at best for such prehistoric animals, as scientists can only get so much from bones and skeletal structure. But there is no denying that these guys were huge. Mammoth borsoni, one of the debated species, ranks as the largest of all mastodons and one of the largest mammals ever to walk the earth. This titan of Miocene and Pleistocene Eurasia may have had an average weight of 18 tons, which is about 16,000 kilograms. And that's average, meaning some specimens were bigger. The American Warren mastodon, aka Mammut americanum, which is one of the more common mammoth finds, was significantly smaller, but still comparable to modern African elephants, the biggest land animals today. The average specimen is believed to have weighed about 8.6 tons while standing 9.5 feet at the shoulder. This may have been a little shorter than the max heights of modern elephants, but it was heavier. Bone structure, particularly the pelvic bones, indicates that mastodons were a bit more robust than their distant cousins. Some researchers believe that Warren mastodons could have been up to 80% heavier than elephants of the same shoulder height. That's almost twice as heavy as the heaviest land animal around today. Crazy. Like elephants, though, mastodons were full-time vegetarians. In fact, they were fullivorous, which is just a cool way of saying they ate a lot of leaves. The clearest evidence of this leafy diet is the presence of zygodont molars, which featured sharp ridges that allowed them to shred leaves at an industrial scale. Modern elephants don't have this style of dentition because they have thin flat molars for versatile mixed feeding and grazing. By virtue of being potentially 80% bigger than elephants, it's clear that mastodons spent most of their waking hours foraging and browsing leaves. A modern elephant can eat up to 375 pounds of vegetation in a single day. Working with that same 80% weight difference, it looks like mastodons might have been able to consume 675 pounds of leaves in a single 24-hour window. Crazier. So, what kind of places and environments would accommodate mastodons and their enormous appetites? Well, fossil records indicate that mastodons emerged and lived in North and Central America, with the greatest numbers found in what we now call the United States. Mastodons would later migrate into Eurasia via the Bering Land Bridge. They lived in cool, lush woodlands with ample browsing. Their feet were wide and sported thick, stubby toes, allowing the animals to walk on soft, muddy earth. Mastodon fossils also suggest that it was a social animal that lived in small, close-knit herds. The nature of bones found in concentrated sites also indicates that they lived in matriarchal groups consisting of adult females and their young. This is very similar to modern elephants, whose herds are made up of females and calves while being led by a dominant and elderly matriarch. Males lived alone or even in smaller bachelor groups, which is also just like modern elephants. They would leave their birth herd upon reaching sexual maturity and make their way out into the world. We have no clear way of fully understanding the dynamics of mastodon reproduction, but we can at least infer from what we know about elephants today. For instance, it's unlikely mastodons had strict reproductive windows or mating seasons like many other animals. It's more probable that males and females mated whenever they were ready and available. So, how did the mastodon go extinct? Well, the dominant theory is that climate and environmental changes during the Pleistocene led to the drastic reduction in forests that could support them. American mastodon species, in particular, were victims of the Great North American Pleistocene extinction phase, which saw the disappearance of many megafauna animals. Humans are another possible factor, though how prehistoric people managed to overhunt 10-ton behemoths is a rather fascinating mystery. The animals did not do themselves any favors either with their immense dietary needs and low reproductive rates. Rearing a mastodon to independence was a major time investment, from the long gestation periods to the even longer dependent stage. They simply could not reproduce quickly enough to offset the pressures exerted on them by the environment and predation. Of course, despite its extinction, the mastodon is still an important cultural icon to this day. Bones and skeletal reconstructions are major attractions at natural history museums all over North America and Europe. They've also been portrayed and referenced in countless pop culture and media material, meaning that the mastodon will never truly die. Mammoths. Mammoths were elephant-like animals from the extinct Mammothus genus. The Mammothus genus belongs to the Elephantidae family, alongside modern-day elephants and a bunch of other extinct elephantids. The family is in turn under the Proboscideae order, which was also home to other families that are now long extinct, including the mastodons Mammutidae. The word mammoth comes from a native Siberian term for earth horn. The first fossils and frozen carcasses were found in Siberia in the 17th century. For a long time, mammoths were an important part of Siberian native cultures. Some tribes even revered the beasts as water spirits. To date, over 25,000 mammoth fossils and remains have been found throughout Eurasia, North America, and Africa. Further evidence is found in the many rock paintings depicting the animals. There are 10 officially recognized species of mammoth. The woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primogenius, is the best known because of its prominent place in scientific discussion and pop culture. About 10 million years ago, Gomphotheres, a family of fully terrestrial proboscideans in Africa, spawned a spin-off group known as Elephantidae. This group evolved further until the emergence of the earliest mammoth species, Mammuthus subplanifrons, during the Miocene around 6.2 to 5.3 million years ago. Mammuthus africanus is another notable African species that dates between 5 and 2.58 million years ago. The Arabian land bridge allowed mammoths to migrate and spread into Eurasia around 3.2 million years ago. Mammuthus romanus is the earliest Eurasian mammoth we know of, and it later evolved into the meridionalis, aka the southern mammoth. About 1.7 million years ago, meridionalis gave rise to Trogontheriae, the steppe mammoth of Central and Eastern Asia. This steppe mammoth would later cross the Bering Land Bridge and give rise to Columbi, the Columbian mammoth. The steppe mammoths that remained in Siberia eventually became smaller and evolved into Primigenius, the woolly mammoth. These woolly mammoths would also cross the land bridge and reach North America. The youngest mammoth remains were discovered on Russia's Wrangel Island. These finds indicate that mammoths were around as recently as 3,700 to 4,000 years ago. All in all, there were at least 10 different species of mammoth during prehistoric times, and they were quite varied, especially physically. Size is one such physical aspect. Most mammoths were huge, as you would expect of any elephant cousin. However, some were bigger than others. Primigenius, the woolly mammoth, is believed to have reached a maximum height of 11 feet and a maximum weight of 13,200 pounds. It may have got considerably larger than this, but fossil evidence is limited. These dimensions put the woolly mammoth on par with modern African elephants when it comes to both height and weight. However, the southern steppe and Columbian mammoths were bigger. These two species were the largest mammoths on record, though it is unclear who was number one. Bulls of both species are believed to have reached 13 feet at the shoulder and weighed about 24,250 pounds. Again, it's possible that there were even larger specimens. Like with modern elephants, female mammoths were significantly smaller than males, but still enormous in their own right. Both sexes of all species bore tusks. Shape and size varied quite drastically. As you probably already know, mammoth tusks are far more pronounced than elephant tusks. The biggest tusk on record is a 16-foot marvel that belonged to a Colombian mammoth. Meanwhile, the longest woolly mammoth tusk is 13.1 feet long. For comparison, the biggest mastodon tusk ever found measures 16 feet and 4 inches. That said, not all mammoths were overly massive. Notable species like the Cretan dwarf mammoth, Mammuthus creticus, were relatively tiny. This species in particular evolved such a small frame as a result of insular dwarfism. In other words, it had to get smaller to efficiently make use of its limited island resources. This little mammoth measured 3.3 feet at the shoulder and weighed no more than 400 pounds. Other notable differences. While mammoths and mastodons shared a lot of similarities, they were completely different animals, as we shall soon see. For starters, mastodons were adapted for life in woodlands, where they could cater to a huge need for leaves and foliage. In contrast, mammoths were grazers that preferred open habitats. These dietary differences also influenced dental differences. Mastodons had cone-shaped molars for slicing leaves, while mammoths had flatter ridged molars for chewing grass. Tusks, which are the most prominent teeth, were different too. Mastodon tusks are not as curved as mammoth tusks and are more akin to modern elephant tusks. Then, there are some skeletal and structural differences. Firstly, mastodons were not as tall as the tallest mammoth species, but were generally stockier and heavier, especially when compared to mammoth specimens of similar height. Secondly, mammoth skulls have prominent bulbous foreheads, while mastodon skulls have gently sloping foreheads similar to African elephants. Finally, we have timeline differences. Mastodons first emerged on the scene around 27 million years ago and went extinct approximately 11,000 years ago. Mammoths showed up far later, about 6 million years ago, and they were around until about 4,000 years ago.